The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of the auction house in Charleston, South Carolina, casting pale gold streaks across rows of mahogany tables covered with objects that had outlived their original owners. There were porcelain dolls with cracked faces, tarnished silverware wrapped in aged velvet, framed daguerreotypes of stern-faced families whose names had been forgotten, and stacks of leather-bound books whose pages had yellowed into brittleness. In the far corner of the room, almost hidden beneath a stack of embroidered linens, sat a music box. It was small, perhaps 8 inches wide and 6 inches deep, crafted from dark walnut wood with delicate brass hinges and a tarnished keyhole on the front. The surface was worn smooth by decades of handling, and the corners showed signs of minor damage, small chips and scratches that spoke of a long life in many hands. There was nothing particularly remarkable about it. It looked like countless other music boxes from the late 19th century, the kind that played simple melodies when you wound the key and lifted the lid. The kind that grandmothers kept on their dressing tables, filled with brooches and hairpins. The kind that eventually ended up in estate sales, passed from one indifferent hand to another until they were sold for a few dollars to collectors or nostalgic strangers. Dr. Evelyn Cross had not intended to attend the auction that day. She was a historian specializing in material culture of the American South, particularly objects connected to the lives of enslaved people and their descendants. Her work often took her into archives, museums, and private collections, searching for the fragments of stories that had been deliberately erased or overlooked. She had spent years developing a method of reading objects, not just for what they were, but for what they contained, the hidden marks, the repairs, the wear patterns that revealed how they had been used and by whom. On this particular afternoon, she had been invited by a colleague to examine a collection of plantation records that were being auctioned off as part of a larger estate. She arrived late, slipping into the back of the room just as the auctioneer was moving through a lot of household items. "Where are you calling from? I want to know." Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories. Evelyn's attention drifted across the tables, cataloging objects out of habit. She noticed the music box almost by accident. Something about it made her pause. Perhaps it was the way the light caught the edge of the lid, or the unusual weight of the wood, or simply the instinct she had developed over years of research. She moved closer, weaving between other attendees who were examining silverware and jewelry. When she reached the table, she picked up the music box carefully, feeling its weight in her hands. It was heavier than it should have been. She turned it over, examining the base. There was a small brass plate screwed into the bottom, engraved with a date and initials. 1894. The initials read M.Th. She set the box down and opened the lid. The mechanism inside was intact, a cylinder studded with tiny pins that would pluck the teeth of a metal comb to produce music. She turned the key gently, and the box released a thin, fragile melody, a lullaby that sounded both beautiful and unbearably sad in the crowded room. But as the music played, Evelyn noticed something else. The interior of the lid was lined with faded red velvet, worn thin in places. And beneath the velvet, barely visible unless you looked closely, there was a slight bulge, as if something had been hidden underneath the fabric. She ran her fingers along the edge of the velvet, feeling for a seam. There it was, a tiny opening where the fabric had been carefully stitched and then partially loosened over time. Her pulse quickened. She glanced around the room. No one was paying attention to her. She carefully worked her finger beneath the velvet, lifting it just enough to see what lay underneath. There was paper. Old paper, folded many times and pressed flat against the wood. She let the velvet fall back into place and closed the lid. Her hands were shaking slightly. She knew she had to buy the box. When the auctioneer called the lot number, Evelyn raised her paddle without hesitation. There were no other bidders. She paid $23 for the music box and carried it out of the auction house wrapped in brown paper, clutching it against her chest as if it might disappear. Back in her apartment, Evelyn placed the music box on her desk under the bright light of her reading lamp. She made herself a cup of tea, forced herself to sit down, and then, with the kind of care she reserved for archival documents, she opened the lid once more. This time, she used a small pair of tweezers to lift the edge of the velvet lining. Slowly, she peeled it back, revealing the hidden compartment beneath. There were 3 folded pieces of paper, yellowed and brittle with age. She removed them one by one, laying them flat on the desk. The first was a letter, written in faded brown ink on thin, lined paper. The handwriting was small and precise, the kind of script taught in the schools of the late 19th century. The letter was dated October 7, 1894, and it was addressed to no one. It began simply, without preamble. I write this because I cannot speak it. I write this because no one will hear it if I do. My name is Clara, and I am 16 years old. I was born in this house, and I will likely die in this house, though I am called free. Evelyn's breath caught. She read the sentence again. The word free had been underlined twice. She continued reading. My mother was Harriet, who was enslaved here until the war ended. My father was the man who owned her. I do not write his name. My mother told me stories when I was small, stories about how she survived, about the things she endured, about the children she lost. She told me I was born into freedom, but freedom is a word that means different things to different people. I am not enslaved, but I am not free. I work in this house. I clean the floors my mother cleaned. I serve the family my mother served. They call me by my first name and they smile at me, but I know what they think. I know what I am to them. The letter continued for 2 pages, written in the same careful hand. Clara described her daily life in detail. She woke before dawn to light the fires and prepare breakfast. She washed the laundry in the yard, scrubbing stains from the fine dresses of the daughters of the house. She mended torn hems and polished silver and served meals in silence while the family talked around her as if she were invisible. She described the way the eldest son watched her when no one else was looking, the way his mother spoke to her in a voice that was soft but carried an edge of contempt. She wrote about the exhaustion that settled into her bones, the way her hands ached at night, the way she sometimes stood in front of the mirror in her small room and wondered who she would have been if she had been born somewhere else, to someone else. I am told I should be grateful, she wrote. I am told that my life is better than my mother's life, and perhaps it is. I am not beaten. I am not sold. I am not chained. But I am not free. I am a shadow in this house, a ghost of my mother, and I do not know how to leave. The letter ended abruptly, without signature, as if Clara had been interrupted or had simply run out of things to say. Evelyn set the letter aside and picked up the second piece of paper. It was a list, written in the same handwriting, but hastily, as if jotted down in a moment of anger or desperation. It was titled, Things They Do Not Know. The list was short. They do not know that I can read. They do not know that I take their books when they are asleep and read by candlelight in my room. They do not know that I understand everything they say, even when they speak in French, thinking I cannot follow. They do not know that I have been saving money, a few coins at a time, hidden in the lining of my mattress. They do not know that I dream of leaving. They do not know that I am afraid I never will. The third paper was different. It was smaller, torn from a notebook, and it contained only a few lines written in a shakier hand, as if written in haste or under great emotional strain. If you find this, know that I tried. Know that I was here. Know that I mattered. My name is Clara. Remember me. Evelyn sat back in her chair, staring at the papers spread across her desk. She felt the weight of what she had found, the presence of a voice that had been silent for more than a century. Clara had hidden these words inside a music box, an object that would have seemed innocent, decorative, easily overlooked. She had chosen her hiding place carefully, knowing that the box might survive even if she did not, knowing that someday, someone might lift the velvet and find her words. Evelyn understood that she was holding evidence of a life, a testimony that had been deliberately concealed because it was too dangerous to speak aloud. Over the next several days, Evelyn began to research the music box and its origins. The initials on the base, M.C.H., led her to a family named Haverford, a prominent planter family in Charleston who had owned a large estate on the outskirts of the city. The estate had been sold in the early 20th century and eventually subdivided, but records showed that the Haverford family had remained in the house until at least 1910. Evelyn located the family's genealogy records through the local historical society. There had been a Margaret Catherine Haverford, born in 1876, who would have been 18 years old in 1894. The music box had likely belonged to her. Evelyn then turned to census records, searching for any mention of a Clara associated with the Haverford household. The 1890 census listed several people living at the Haverford estate, including Margaret, her parents, 2 younger siblings, and 3 servants. 2 of the servants were listed by name, both older women, likely former enslaved people who had continued to work for the family after emancipation. The 3rd was listed only as girl, colored, age 15. No name, just girl. Evelyn felt a surge of anger and sadness. This was how Clara had been recorded, reduced to a category, a labor unit, an anonymous presence. But the letter had given her a name, a voice, a story. Evelyn expanded her search, looking for any trace of Clara in other records. She found a handwritten ledger in the archives of the Charleston Historical Society, an account book kept by the Haverford family that listed household expenses. In the entries for 1894 and 1895, there were payments made to C. housegirl, small amounts, a few dollars here and there, far less than what would have been paid to a white domestic worker. The payments stopped abruptly in March of 1896. There was no explanation, no notation. Clara simply disappeared from the records. Evelyn searched death records, marriage records, anything that might tell her what had happened. She found nothing. Clara had vanished, as so many young black women had vanished from the historical record, their lives unrecorded, their deaths unmarked, their stories lost. But Clara had left something behind. She had left her words. And Evelyn was determined to make sure those words were heard. She began by transcribing the letters carefully, preserving every detail of the handwriting, every crossed-out word, every ink blot. She photographed the papers under controlled lighting, creating high-resolution images that could be studied and shared. She consulted with archivists and conservators to ensure that the documents were properly preserved. She also reached out to descendants of the Haverford family, hoping to find more information about the household in 1894, about Clara, about what might have happened to her. The responses she received were mixed. Some family members were defensive, insisting that their ancestors had been kind to their servants, that conditions had been far better than on other estates, that whatever hardships Clara had experienced were simply the reality of the time. Others were more open, acknowledging the painful history, expressing sorrow for what had been done. One descendant, a woman in her 70s named Margaret Haverford Ellis, agreed to meet with Evelyn. They met at a cafe in downtown Charleston, a quiet place with exposed brick walls and soft lighting. Margaret was a tall woman with silver hair and sharp blue eyes. She listened carefully as Evelyn explained the discovery of the music box and the letters hidden inside. When Evelyn finished, Margaret was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "I knew there was something," she said. "I always knew. When I was a child, my grandmother, the original Margaret, the one the music box belonged to, she used to tell me stories about the house, about the people who worked there. But there were things she wouldn't talk about. There were silences. And I could feel them even as a child. I could feel the weight of what was not being said." She paused, looking down at her hands. "I want to help you," she said. "I want to know the truth, even if it's painful. Especially if it's painful." Margaret provided Evelyn with access to family papers that had been stored in her attic, boxes of letters, diaries, photographs, and account books that had never been donated to any archive. Evelyn spent weeks going through the material, piecing together the life of the Haverford household in the 1890s. She found references to Clara in several places. In a diary kept by Margaret Haverford Sr., Clara was mentioned occasionally, always in passing, always in relation to tasks she had completed or failed to complete. "Clara burned the bread today," one entry read. "I spoke to her quite sharply." Another entry, dated January 1895, noted, "Clara has been unwell. She is too thin and too quiet. I worry she is not suited to the work." There was no follow-up, no indication of concern beyond the inconvenience it caused. But there was one entry that stopped Evelyn cold. It was dated March 10, 1896. "Clara has left us. She disappeared in the night without a word. It is very inconvenient, as we are short-handed and I do not know where to find a replacement. I cannot imagine why she would leave. We treated her well. I am quite hurt by her ingratitude." Evelyn read the entry several times, feeling the disconnect between Margaret's perception and Clara's reality. Margaret had believed she was treating Clara well, had genuinely felt hurt by her departure. But Clara's letter had told a different story. Clara had been exhausted, afraid, trapped. She had saved money in secret, dreamed of escape, and finally, she had taken the risk. She had left. Whether she had found freedom or met some other fate, Evelyn did not know. But she had tried. She had chosen to leave, and that act of self-determination, small as it might seem, was an act of resistance. Evelyn continued searching for any trace of Clara after 1896. She checked city directories, employment records, church registries, anything that might reveal where Clara had gone. She found one possible lead, a Clara Johnson listed in the 1900 census in Philadelphia, working as a seamstress, age listed as 22. The age matched. The location made sense. Philadelphia had been a destination for many Black Southerners seeking better opportunities. But there was no way to confirm that this Clara Johnson was the same Clara who had worked in the Haverford house. The trail went cold. Still, Evelyn felt she had enough to tell Clara's story. She wrote an article for an academic journal, detailing the discovery of the music box, the letters, and the historical context. She included photographs of the documents and a transcription of Clara's words. The article was published and quickly gained attention. Other historians reached out, sharing similar discoveries, letters and diaries hidden in walls, sewn into quilts, buried in gardens, all written by Black women and men who had lived in the shadow of slavery and its aftermath, who had found ways to record their experiences even when it was dangerous to do so. Evelyn was invited to speak at conferences, to present her findings, to participate in discussions about how to recover and preserve these hidden histories. She collaborated with a local museum to create an exhibition centered on the music box and Clara's letters. The exhibition included the original objects, carefully displayed under glass, alongside enlarged reproductions of the letters so that visitors could read Clara's words in her own handwriting. There were contextual panels explaining the conditions faced by Black domestic workers in the post-emancipation South, the ways in which freedom was constrained and controlled, the resilience and resistance of those who lived through it. The exhibition opened on a warm evening in May. The museum was crowded with people, historians and students and community members, Black and white, young and old. Evelyn stood near the display case holding the music box, watching as people leaned close to read Clara's words. She saw tears in the eyes of some visitors. She heard whispered conversations, people sharing their own family stories, their own connections to this history. One woman, elderly and dignified, stood in front of the case for a long time, reading every word. When she finally turned away, she approached Evelyn. "My grandmother worked as a domestic," the woman said quietly. She never talked about it much. "But I remember once, when I was very young, she told me that she used to write things down, things she couldn't say out loud. She said she hid the papers in a book, a Bible, I think. After she died, we never found them. I always wondered what she had written, what she wanted us to know." She paused, looking back at the display. "Thank you for finding Clara's words. Thank you for making sure she wasn't forgotten." Evelyn felt the weight of that gratitude, the responsibility it carried. Clara's story was not unique. There were countless other Claras, countless other hidden voices, waiting to be found. Some would be discovered, as this music box had been discovered, by chance or by persistence. Others would remain hidden forever, their words lost, their names unrecorded. But each discovery mattered. Each voice recovered was a small act of justice, a refusal to let the past be erased or sanitized or forgotten. Evelyn continued her research, expanding her focus beyond Clara to explore the broader patterns of domestic labor in the post-emancipation South. She found that Clara's experience was part of a larger system, one in which Black women and girls were funneled into domestic service, often working for the same families that had once enslaved their parents and grandparents. The work was poorly paid if paid at all. It was exhausting and demeaning. It offered little opportunity for advancement or escape. And yet, within this system, women like Clara found ways to resist, to preserve their dignity, to dream of something better. Some, like Clara. Others stayed but found small acts of defiance, taking extra food, breaking a dish, speaking back when no one was listening. And some, like Clara, wrote. They documented their lives, their thoughts, their hopes and fears, hiding their words in places where they might survive. Evelyn also began to think more deeply about the music box itself, about why Clara had chosen it as a hiding place. The box was beautiful, a luxury item, something that belonged to Margaret Haverford, not to Clara. It represented the world Clara served but could never fully enter. And yet, Clara had claimed it in a way, by hiding her words inside it. She had taken something that symbolized the leisure and comfort of her employers and transformed it into a vessel for her own story. The music box played a lullaby, a song meant to soothe and comfort, but beneath that surface, beneath the velvet lining, was the truth, painful and raw. The juxtaposition was powerful. It spoke to the ways in which the lives of Black domestic workers were hidden in plain sight, present but invisible, essential but unacknowledged. The music box had passed through many hands over the decades, sold and resold, its true significance unknown, until someone finally looked closely enough to see what was hidden beneath the surface. Evelyn wondered how many other objects were out there, ordinary things that contained extraordinary stories, waiting for someone to notice, to care, to preserve what had been deliberately concealed. The exhibition traveled to other cities, reaching wider audiences. Evelyn received letters from people who had seen it, people who had been moved by Clara's words, people who had begun searching their own attics and basements for hidden documents, for traces of their own family histories. Some found things, scraps of paper, old photographs, letters written in languages their grandparents had spoken but that had been lost in the following generations. Others found nothing but felt the absence keenly, mourning the stories that had been lost, the voices that had been silenced. Evelyn created a website where people could share their discoveries, a growing archive of hidden histories, a testament to the resilience of memory and the human need to be remembered. She also worked with archivists to develop guidelines for how to handle such discoveries, how to preserve fragile documents, how to respect the privacy and dignity of the people whose stories were being recovered, how to ensure that these histories were not exploited or sensationalized but treated with the care and seriousness they deserved. Years passed. The music box remained on display in the museum, a permanent part of the collection. Evelyn continued her work, finding other hidden objects, other hidden voices. She never stopped thinking about Clara, about the girl who had written those words in secret, who had folded them carefully and hidden them away, hoping that someday, someone would find them. Evelyn often imagined Clara in that small room, sitting by candlelight, writing by hand in the quiet hours before dawn, the house asleep around her, the weight of her isolation and her determination pressing down on her shoulders. She imagined Clara sealing the papers inside the music box, tucking the velvet back into place, closing the lid, and winding the key one last time to hear the lullaby play. She imagined Clara leaving the house on that March night in 1896, walking away into the darkness, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back and the hope that somewhere, somehow, there was a life waiting for her that was truly hers. Evelyn never found definitive proof of what happened to Clara after she left. But in a way, that uncertainty was its own kind of answer. Clara had escaped the record. She had slipped away from the system that sought to define and confine her. She had become, for a moment, invisible in a way that was liberating rather than oppressive. Whether she had made it to Philadelphia, whether she had built a new life, whether she had found happiness or continued to struggle, Evelyn could not say. But she knew that Clara had tried. She had taken control of her own story, even if only in the act of writing it down and hiding it away. And that act, small and secret as it was, had echoed across more than a century, reaching Evelyn's hands, reaching the eyes of thousands of people who read her words and recognized in them something universal, the longing for freedom, the need to be seen, the insistence that one's life, however constrained, however overlooked, mattered. The music box sits in its glass case, beneath soft lighting that brings out the warm tones of the walnut wood and the faded red of the velvet lining. Visitors still stopped to look at it, to read the letters displayed beside it, to listen to the recording of the lullaby that plays on a loop, thin and fragile and heartbreakingly beautiful. And every time someone reads Clara's words, every time someone pauses to think about the life she lived and the courage it took to leave those words behind, Clara is remembered. Her voice, hidden for so long, is heard. Her story, which might have been lost forever, survives. The music box, which once seemed ordinary, has become a memorial, a testament, a reminder that the past is never truly past, that the voices we think are lost are only waiting, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for someone to lift the lid and listen. Evelyn often thinks about the last line of Clara's note. Remember me. It is both a plea and a command, a quiet insistence that her existence mattered, that her struggles and her dreams and her acts of resistance were significant, that she deserved to be more than a nameless entry in a census, more than a ghost in someone else's house. And because of that music box, because of the letters hidden beneath the velvet, because someone stopped and looked closely and cared enough to preserve what they found, Clara is remembered. Her name is known. Her words are read. Her story is told. And in that telling, in that remembering, there is a small but profound act of justice, a recognition that every life, no matter how constrained, no matter how overlooked, contains a story worth preserving, a voice worth hearing, a truth worth fighting to uncover. The music box remains, a small wooden object with brass hinges and a tarnished keyhole, no longer ordinary, no longer just a relic of the past. It has become something more, a bridge between then and now, a witness to suffering and survival, a vessel for a voice that refused to be silenced. And as long as people continue to look closely, to question what they see, to search beneath the surface of the ordinary for the extraordinary stories hidden there, objects like this music box will continue to speak. They will continue to tell us who we were, who we are, and who we might become if we choose to listen, to remember, and to honor the voices that history tried to erase. In the months following the exhibition's opening, something unexpected began to happen. People started bringing their own objects to the museum, small things they had found in attics and basements, things that had belonged to grandparents and great-grandparents, things that had been passed down without explanation or had been discovered by accident. There was a woman who brought a worn leather diary with pages that had been carefully cut out, leaving only the binding and a few fragments of text. There was a man who carried in a wooden box filled with buttons, hundreds of them, all different sizes and colors, and tucked beneath them, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a folded map with routes marked in faint pencil, routes that led north. There was a young girl who showed Evelyn a quilt that her great-great-grandmother had made, and when they examined it closely under magnification, they found words stitched into the pattern, so small and so carefully hidden within the design that they were almost invisible, words that spelled out names and dates and places, a genealogy preserved in thread. Each object told a story. Each object had been chosen deliberately as a hiding place, transformed from something ordinary into something sacred, a keeper of memory, a protector of truth. Evelyn began to understand that Clara's music box was not an anomaly. It was part of a vast, hidden archive, an archive created by people who knew that their words and their memories would not be welcomed in the official record, who understood that they had to find other ways to preserve what mattered to them. They hid their stories in the structure of their daily lives, in the objects they touched and used, in the things that would be overlooked or dismissed as insignificant. They turned sewing baskets into libraries, quilts into manuscripts, buttons into markers of identity and resistance. They wrote on the backs of photographs, on the inside covers of Bibles, on scraps of paper tucked into the linings of coats and hats. They encoded information in songs and recipes and the patterns of beadwork. They created a parallel history, one that ran alongside the official narrative but remained invisible to those who did not know how to look. Evelyn realized that her work was changing. She was no longer just a historian recovering individual stories. She was helping to uncover an entire methodology of resistance, a system of preservation that had been practiced by generations of people who had been excluded from power, who had been denied the right to speak their truths openly. This methodology was sophisticated and deliberate. It required knowledge of materials, an understanding of what would last and what would decay, a sense of which objects would be valued and preserved by future generations and which would be discarded. It required courage, because hiding these stories was itself an act of defiance, an assertion that one's life and experiences were worthy of record even when the dominant culture insisted otherwise. And it required hope, the belief that someday someone would find these hidden words and would care enough to read them, to understand them, to share them with the world. Evelyn began working with other scholars, anthropologists and folklorists and material culture specialists to develop new methods for identifying and interpreting these hidden archives. They created databases cataloging the types of objects that had been used as hiding places, the materials that had proven most durable, the techniques that had been employed to conceal writing and images. They held workshops teaching people how to examine family heirlooms carefully, how to look for inconsistencies in construction that might indicate hidden compartments, how to use non-invasive imaging techniques to reveal text that had been written in invisible ink or covered over with paint or fabric. They published guides for archivists and museum curators, encouraging them to look beyond the surface of objects in their collections, to consider that what appeared to be simply decorative or utilitarian might contain layers of meaning that had not yet been discovered. The work was painstaking and often frustrating. For every object that yielded a hidden story, there were dozens that revealed nothing, or that had been damaged beyond recovery. The paper disintegrated, the ink faded to invisibility, the thread rotted away. There were objects that had been deliberately destroyed by people who feared what they contained, or who believed that the past was better left buried. There were families who refused to allow researchers to examine heirlooms, unwilling to confront the possibility that their ancestors' stories might be more complicated or more painful than the narratives they had been told. But there were also moments of extraordinary discovery, moments when a hidden text was revealed and a voice that had been silent for generations suddenly spoke clearly, urgently, demanding to be heard. Each of these moments felt like a small miracle, a victory against erasure and forgetting. Evelyn often thought about the music box, about the moment she had first felt the weight of it in her hands, about the instinct that had made her look more closely. She thought about how easily she might have missed it, how the box might have been sold to someone else, someone who would never have thought to lift the velvet lining, someone who would have kept it on a shelf as a curiosity and eventually passed it on without ever knowing what it contained. She thought about all the other Claras whose words had not been found, whose hiding places had been too good or whose objects had been lost or destroyed. She carried the weight of those lost voices with her, a reminder that for every story recovered, countless others remained hidden or had vanished entirely. But she also carried Clara's words, the fierce insistence of that final line, "Remember me," and she understood that the work she was doing, the work of recovery and remembrance, was not just about the past. It was about the present, about who we choose to remember and why, about which voices we amplify and which we allow to remain silent. It was about acknowledging that history is not a fixed narrative but a conversation, one that changes as new voices enter it, as hidden stories emerge and challenge the versions we thought we knew. And it was about justice, the recognition that being seen, being heard, being remembered, is a fundamental human right, one that should not be reserved only for those who held power or left behind monuments and official records. Every life contains a story. Every story deserves to be preserved. And every object, no matter how ordinary it might appear, might be waiting to reveal something extraordinary if only we take the time to look closely, to handle it with care, and to listen for the voices speaking from beneath its surface.